Hello friends, this is your friend back with a new fanfic. What if Sakura met a mysterious stranger online who changed everything? Episode 3. If you like this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Now, let's start. I frowned, downright disturbed. I've only been off the computer for an estimated 13 hours, yet in spite of that, my inbox was overflowing by the next morning, with notifications of new posts and comments and graffiti all coming from a similar sender. The ones I'd been reading right now were the most recent, though it was part of a bigger bunch that I really did not fancy reading one by one. The thought of Rogue was beginning to agitate me deeply, rather than give me fluttering butterflies in the stomach like before. What was with this guy? Suddenly, the person I'd been talking to for the past week, the person I'd actually been liking so much, had disappeared within a short span of 24 hours. Rogue No Network wrote on your wall. 11:10 a.m. I'll find out where you live, where you go to school, your address. Before I had the chance to even gasp, I became aware of the presence that was closing in behind me. Spotting a dark shadow in the corner of my eye, I shuffled for the mouse and diverted the webpage to home. Next to me, Sasuke held a quizzical, yet amused look on his face as he stared with one raised eyebrow. What? Nothing, he said abruptly, his eyes studying me as though I was an odd-looking creature from another planet. Slowly, he sat down beside me. I'm just using the computer right here. I stared back at him, skeptical. There are 100 other unoccupied computers around. I'm not allowed to sit beside you, he asked pointedly, waiting for an answer. When I didn't give him one, he said, okay, whatever. I won't bother you. You can his eyes flicked to the computer on my desk, continue on whatever you were doing earlier. Fine, I will. I faced the front towards the computer. After a while, Sasuke said, so you were staring at the Yahoo homepage before I arrived. I'm reading, I reasoned pathetically. Of course, he said with a tone that evidently stated I was crazy. I tried to ignore him as a voice spoke suddenly from the computer speakers. You have one new mail. Resting on my inbox was an unread notice. Warily, I clicked it open, though I had a pretty good, solid idea what it was. A comment from the Rogue. What else, and who else? Rogue No Network wrote on your wall. 11:20 a.m. Let me guess where you are right now. In school. It's lunchtime. Rogue No Network wrote on your wall. 11:21 a.m. And you're in the library, am I right? Rogue No Network wrote on your wall. 11:22 a.m. Of course I am. Immediately, I threw my head around, scanning at every person within the room that may somehow look suspicious. There was no one, or it seemed so. There were only a few students nerdy enough to spend their lunchtime in the library. Half of them huddled in tables doing schoolwork, the rest hunched up in a corner reading. None of them looked insane enough to be a stalker. I tried convincing myself, this is stupid. It was obviously a joke. It could even be someone I knew in real life, playing a prank on me and whatnot. My anxiety, which was increasing bit by bit, was unnecessary. However, I could not shake off the gut feeling that a pair of eyes was watching me that very moment. I ran out of the library. What's he saying? Gosh, it's not like he's a part of Wait. Is he? Things began to make more sense, even if that sense terrified me that I'd rather not understand it. But I did. Gangs like these don't just leave you be, you know. They'll come back. Hey, ugly. I turned languidly towards the voice that belonged to Sai, knowing instantly it was him from the nickname, and saw him squeezing through the crowd of people that crammed the hallway. When he was within a meter's distance, he grabbed hold of my arm and pulled me aside, leading me down through a less filled, minor hall. Where are we going? I asked half-heartedly, too deep in thought to even bother at the moment. Hold on, I want to show you something. He spoke in his usual monotonic way, but one could not miss the traces of gusto in his voice. We stopped in front of a locker. Sai, finally releasing my arm, entered the combination and unlocked it. He took out a transparent paper encasement, and from that, an A1-sized paper covered with sketched pencil marks all over the page. Sai waved it proudly in front of my face, and a barely noticeable curve at the end of his lips, the closest to a grin Sai would get. I knew what he was grinning about. His drawing was spectacular. The portrait was simple, a panorama of a bare room with open windows that let in the moonlight. On the opposite side of the room was a dim corridor with indefinite, murky shadows and corners that the light rays were nearly reaching, or otherwise unable to. The only thing that broke the scene was the big, fat, A+, marked in red print on the right-hand corner of the paper. We were currently working on the aspect of shadowing in arts, a subject which Sai seemed to master perfectly. On the other hand, he can perfect just about everything that has anything to do with visual arts. It's great, I remarked, though it lacked enthusiasm. Sai stared, analyzing me. Are you okay? Yeah, just tried. I'm exhausted. Last night, after the chat with the rogue, his grim indications of being part of that gang, of course, he could just be saying that to scare me, though I doubt it, had me up until early 4 in the morning, turning and shifting uncomfortably. Since then, I've been in faraway land, lost in the zone, half asleep, whatever, you name it. I tried at least to be avid for Sai. Forget about me. Really, Sai, this is amazing. It looks real. Like, the lighting effects, and the shading and stuff. You should label it ugly. You know I don't title my works. Can't title them. I'll do it for you then. I paused to stare at the drawing and said the first thing that popped in my mind. Call it, Light Devours Darkness. Or, Speed of Light, or, Light Outruns Darkness. That's actually a common misconception. Sai stated, you see, light thinks it's faster than darkness, but it actually isn't. Because however fast light travels towards its destination, it finds darkness already there, waiting. I stared at him incredulously, and it took a little while to let his pessimistic, though logical words sink in. Geez. Yeah, he chuckled. I flinched at the sound, it seemed so hollow. He paused, before adding, it's true, though. I gave him an odd look, and was about to say something like, cheer up, quite hypocritical in my case. I know, when a voice interjected, along with a rough clutch, rough, considering I was subliminal at the moment, just above my elbow. Sakura. Uchiha Sasuke muttered in my ear, half turned away from Sai, who he had wholly and deliberately disregarded. Until Sai cleared his throat. Sasuke looked up, as if noticing him for the first time. Sai. Uchiha. Some greetings. I bet it would be one hell-like silence if these two were put in a room together. Let's go. Sasuke yanked my arm. Short in temper, I yanked it back. Why the heck do people keep tugging at my arm this morning? Go where? I need you to come with me. He pulled on my arm again. I gave Sai an apologetic glance. Bye. I didn't think he noticed. His eyes were fixed stably upon the Uchiha. Giving in, I let Sasuke haul me away, but his glare towards Sai did not go unnoticed under my half-asleep gaze, especially when Sai had called out, see you around. As soon as we were around the corner, I seized my arm away from the Uchiha's hold. Unbothered, he tucked his hands back indifferently in his sweatshirt's pockets. Well, I asked impatiently, what is it? Hurry up. Sasuke grabbed my shoulder and began pushing me forward. You're going to be late for your next class. You pulled me aside for nothing. Basically. He shoved me lightly, get moving. Stubbornly, I stood rooted to the ground, crossing my arms to complete the little scene. I demanded, what's wrong with you and Sai? He lifted one eyebrow, although the rest of his face remained inexpressive. What do you mean? You were glaring at him. What do you have against Sai? Nothing, he said, his tone clearly stating an end to the matter. Well, fine, for now, I'll bug him about it next time. Without any further conversation, we got to my locker, and Sasuke waited, leaning against the one beside mine as I dug in for my bio textbook. I saw the messages, he blurted suddenly. My mind was a little slow in the process today. What? Rogue. The messages he's been sending you. I read some of them. I know. You already told me. The emails. I saw more, he shrugged as if it was nothing. I went on Facebook and read some of your wall. Really? I asked, surprised, flattered, even. Only a day ago, I thought I'd been pathetic for secretly looking up his profile. Turns out it worked vice versa as well. I think the guy's obsessed, he said, avoiding the question, if, really, was even considered a real question at all. I decided to let it pass, but bearing in mind to pester him about it later. You think? I scoffed. Maybe you should report this or something. Or something, I exclaimed. You're telling no one. Okay. No big deal. It's just some freak. He'll stop soon enough. I hope, I added silently. Okay, he said, hesitant, fine. It's probably nothing then, anyway. I tried to dwell on his words, but found it hard to. Sasuke only knew part of it, that I've been receiving messages from an unknown sender who wouldn't leave me alone. He didn't know that that stranger had Googled me like some obsessive maniac who now, if what he claimed was true, knew I lived in Konoha. Would everything still be fine if a complete stranger knew where I lived? I told myself yes, it wouldn't matter. It wasn't like he would break into my house and murder me in my sleep. That's rather foolish to think of. In the back of my head though, I knew it wasn't all that stupid. Perhaps, it was even the slightest bit possible. Hyuga Neji. They were all currently gathered, though not intentionally, it just sort of happened, in the big room which no one occupied. A spare room, initially, but now treated as the entertainment room/computer room since it held the one and only computer about the house where they would now and then hang out to pass time. All of them, except Sai, who had already locked himself up in his room, Konkuro, who was perhaps digging through the kitchen in the hunt for food, and Shino, who probably was screwing with some bugs he'd found in the wall or something. The rest of them passed time wastefully, until the hour hand stroked 10 and signalized their bedtime, at least, Neji's group's bedtime. We have to be asleep by 10, Suigetsu continued. Like, how old does he think we are? 8. We're teenagers. We go to sleep at like, 2 in the morning. Neji, though he hated to admit it, agreed with the blue-haired boy. Morino had been strict as hell on them ever since the first day, when all the while Kakashi's group got to play around with dogs. They were vicious, monstrous dogs, but it had to be better than push-ups. But Neji did not see what the boy was whining about, since they all in general had to be in by 10 at night, anyway. They all had curfews and bedtimes, just that Kakashi's were not so rigorous. It was strict here in the Woodlands house named after its location, Woodlands Avenue, the group home in which they resided in by means of uncountable rules and regulations and serious consequences. All communes were the same, it didn't matter much to Neji, now. He got used to the severity somewhere along the 7 years he'd spent in similar types of communal dwellings. Well, if it makes you feel any better, Kakashi gave us a 10 o'clock curfew too. Kiba piped up as he hung, lying upside down on the old, faded couch that was against the far wall of the room. Yeah, curfew. It's bedtime. You can still hang around the house past 10, while we have to be locked in our rooms already. Suigetsu complained once again. Seriously, was he ever going to stop? You're lucky you get to be in Kakashi's team, dude. The boy grumbled, bet you the nerd likes it. He probably imagines himself doing the nasty with Gaara's sister, too. He earned another smack from the currently reddening Shikamaru, plus an additional one from Gaara, though this was much harder. Don't talk about Tamari, the redhead ordered in monotone, and then, to Shikamaru, and don't go around making out in public. It's disgusting, if you haven't already noticed. And again, Neji agreed silently. He'd seen them playing tonsil hockey just yesterday, and it was quite ghastly to watch, especially considering she was at least his senior by 3 years. Speaking of girls, Kiba piped up, giving a crafty glance towards Gaara. Heard you walked a certain pink chick home yesterday. Gaara, sitting back down in his little solitary corner of the room from having to get up and land a hit on Hazuka, rolled his eyes wordlessly. Receiving no reply, Kiba continued, well, any connection? Was there a spark? I do not kiss and tell, Gaara answered reservedly. The small twitch Sasuke gave all the way on the other side of the room was barely discernible, and no one else had seen it, but it did not go unnoticed under the Hyuga's sharp eyesight. You don't kiss and tell, Kiba said pensively, but you're not telling us. So that means there were sparks. Dude, you guys should definitely hook up. Perfect match. You're like the dark and she's light. You know, you're red and she's pink, which is like, the lighter shade of red. And she's got light green eyes and you've got dark ones. Since when did you start noticing my eyes? Gaara mocked, though the canine-like boy remained unaffected. I'm serious here. I mean, you don't mind, right, Sasuke? The Uchiha, settled on the rolling chair before the sole computer in the house, took his eyes off the screen and glanced aside towards Kiba, speaking for the first time in the conversation, and why would I care? You know, 'cause you guys got that history thing going on. History thing? He glared at Shikamaru, who raised both his hands up as if to say what? You told them. No, Nara said defensively, Kiba probably overheard intentionally. Not me. It was Hazuka. He's the one telling everyone that you and the pink chick got history. This time, he glared at Suigetsu, who, in turn, only grinned. I'm going to murder you someday. Uchiha growled. So you don't mind, right? Kiba asked. I couldn't care less. You sure? 'Cause I was thinking maybe you have this thing for her. What thing? Maybe, you like her. At that very moment, Shino passed by the doorway, and stopped at mid-stride, all ears attentive. Who likes who? You know, that girl in your art. Uchiha likes her. I do not, Sasuke barked. Date her. I don't care. Give it up, Kiba, Suigetsu called out, he doesn't like the girl. How can you be so sure of that? Glaring, Sasuke yelled, I am seriously gonna murder you. Neji Hyuga, who had remained silent throughout the conversation, watched as Uchiha jumped on and beat up Suigetsu. Wordlessly, he rolled his eyes at the mental stupidity of his housemates. Are you even listening? The day had recently just started, the first bell had rung only a minute ago, and yet on an early Monday morning, a voice was already screeching in my ear. I jumped and, to my right, saw Ino entirely riled up against her locker door with a hand on her hip. I shook my head, hoping that along with it, my overcautiousness and paranoia that had developed overnight would shake off as well. I haven't been sleeping well over the last couple of nights. Insomnia has commenced ever since my once-upon-a-time alluring and mysterious chat buddy had turned into what I believe was called a stalker. Initially I thought it was rather impossible for the rogue to actually stalk me, given that the word meant to harass somebody persistently by constantly following, telephoning, etc., steadily and malevolently. Yes, I did look up the dictionary for that one. That was, realistically, impossible to do. He would have to be here, physically, to follow me, and that would be unfeasible for his case, considering I'd met him in the World Wide Web, and the boy could be from anywhere on Earth. He did not actually reside in Konoha just as he'd said the last time. Anyone could simply say that and lie, right? Wrong. Or at least, now I had a very strong feeling that I was wrong. This hunch was only further proved to be correct last night, as I tried to pay no heed to the countless mails that have flooded my inbox, all from a similar sender. I was able to ignore nearly all of it, as it was mostly the same things over and over again. I know you're there. Stop ignoring my messages. Talk to me, Sakura. Answer me, you bitch. Until one caught my attention. The message at the very end, just when he'd been saying goodbye in the unrequited conversation. I blinked. What? Was that it? His forbidding messages, his eerie speeches, they were over. A small part of me doubted that. For a few moments, I sat inertly before the computer, waiting to see if the rogue would sign back on. He didn't. And that, I thought, was the end of it, at least for tonight. And, if I were lucky, forever. Unfortunately, however, I wasn't that providential. It was late, past 11 and nearing midnight, and I was lying in bed with droopy eyelids threatening to close on me any second. Just as I was on the brink of dozing off, closely ready to fall in the deep, peaceful state of unconsciousness that lay ahead, loud, ear-piercing chimes rang in the air, jolting me fully awake. The phone was ringing. Grudgingly, I stood up, a little too fast. Blood drained from my head and I was suddenly lightheaded. Woozy, I fell back to bed. The phone rang again. I waited until it stopped ringing, or until my parents, both of whom, by some miracle, were actually home and not out somewhere doing whatever it was they did in their jobs, picked up the phone. The thrills stopped and a second later, my mom yelled from the kitchen, "Sakura, honey, it's for you." I stood up, unhurriedly this time, and trudged jadedly across my bedroom to grab the phone. "Hello?" I asked somnolently. "Nothing." "Hello." Only static replied. I pressed the cordless phone closer against my ear. It was possible that, due to my fatigue, my hearing senses malfunctioned at the moment. "This is Sakura. You asked for me." Maybe whoever was on the other line had a low signal. Whoever was on the other line must have been insane as well, to call at this ungodly hour of midnight. "Anyone there?" When no one answered, I slammed the phone back on its base. But the night wasn't over for me. A few seconds afterwards, another sound broke out, this time coming from my computer. At first it was a knock, denoting the fact that someone had just signed on. Following that, a soft ding erupted from the speakers as a signal for a new message. The signal, though, did not prepare me for what was about to come. I closed the window immediately after that, logged out and shut down my computer. I wanted to be disconnected from the internet as fast as possible. Detaching myself from the cyber world, I felt farther from the rogue, as the internet was our only connection. At first I thought it was our only contact as well. It did not take long though, before he found another way. He found out my home number. How in the world was he able to find out my contact? I'd been asking myself that ever since last night, and all throughout this morning. If he'd gone as far as knowing my telephone number, then that meant finding out my address wouldn't be too far off, and it wouldn't be as impossible as I thought and hoped it would. I realized this with dread. Looking over my shoulder, I scanned the surrounding area, a habit I've acquired over the week, along with constantly checking my cell phone, half expecting a missed call from, who else? The rogue. There weren't any missed calls, of course. My cell number was unlisted. He'd have no way of finding that out. "Yeah, Ino," I said, answering her question, though very distantly. I was listening. Continue. We were lingering beside her locker, and as what was a typical occurrence, I was listening to her endless complaints. Subject matter, boys, as always. "You can't have them all, Ino." I told her, "Besides, you'll get over what's his name in about a day. Just like you do with all the other boys." "His name is Shikamaru," Ino said with exaggerated highlights. "And he's not like other boys, I swear." "And what makes this guy different?" "He rejected me," she answered, ironically proud. "That's what makes him different. I can just feel the love." "Shut up. What's wrong with her?" Choji asked suddenly, as he walked by us with the typical bag of chips in hand. The bad boy she's head over heels for is dating a senior blonde. I started blandly, causing Ino to flush and scream shut up. At me once again. I rolled my eyes, it's not all that hopeless, you know. No one. Choji blurted, earning a glare from Ino. Not helping. Not lying. He called out, and walked away, his face buried deep within the bag of junk food. Ino sighed heavily. He'd never acknowledge my good looks. She said smugly, he doesn't even know I exist. Sakura. I turned and saw Sai waving, approaching towards where we stood. To Ino, with a long-lasting glance, he greeted, "Hey beautiful." Well, at least someone notices. She muttered, and then to Sai, she smiled, so sweetly it was almost nauseating. Hey. Sai grinned, and if he was able to express emotions, I'd say he was flirting back, which he probably was, beneath that stone facade he had on. Then, breaking his gaze on my best friend, he turned to me. I expected him to say something sweet too, or perhaps just smile at me. Instead, though, he tugged my arm harshly and blurted, "Well, come on, you hag. We'll be late for class." I twitched. Just great. As a lone individual, I could probably pass on as pretty or something, perhaps even attractive in the simplest ways. Put me beside Ino, however, and she's the swan princess, while I in turn, magically transform into the ugly duckling. Story of my life. Sai, next to me, suddenly stiffened, the grip he had on my arm tautened, as he gazed straight ahead solidly and loathingly. "Let's go now, Sakura," he said with an inexpressive tone. I looked up and saw that his gaze led to none other than Uchiha Sasuke, who had just appeared from around the corner and was slowly nearing us. When I didn't respond, Sai did not try to tug my arm again. Instead, he hauled me away hurriedly down the hall, without saying goodbye to his so-called beautiful Ino, and only slowed down when we were already in a completely different wing of the school. "What's up?" I asked once he stopped the fast walk. Sai, strolling casually towards Art Land, the main art area of the school, our classroom, as though what happened didn't just happen, shrugged. "Nothing much. You." I growled, ticked off. "You're hilarious, Sai, really, no. Now what about you and Sasuke?" You were glaring at each other. "I suppose I just hate having to look at him," he replied nonchalantly, and to that I would have fallen over comically. "In case you haven't noticed, you both look the same." "Yeah, he copies me," he said smugly. "I don't really care who copied who. What's between you and Sasuke?" He shrugged. "Mere loathing. Nothing more." He looked uncertain, as though there was more he had to say but was contemplating whether or not he should. I stared at him, my head tilted curiously, signaling him to continue. "I see you hanging out with the Uchiha a lot." "Not a whole lot," I answered back, so. Suddenly, he stopped walking and turned to me. Seriousness was written all over his face as he looked deep in my eyes with a frown. Hesitantly, he said, "Don't hang around him too much, or just don't at all." "Why?" I blurted. "No specific reason," Sai muttered and resumed walking. "Just that, Uchiha's pretty, you know, messed up." "Messed up? You know he's in this program for teen offenders who got charged with a bunch of pretty violent crimes, right?" "That's what I mean by messed up. You're part of that curriculum too," I reminded him. "Yeah, but I'm out in 2 or 3 weeks. Uchiha's gonna be staying for months. He screws up one more time and he's off to juvie. You know he takes these anger management sessions." That wasn't very hard to believe. Sasuke had a very short temper. He'd explode out of nowhere about anything and anytime, depending on his mood, which was usually set in the grumpy mode. "Look, I know I can't tell you what to do, but just, be careful around the Uchiha, okay? I have a bad feeling about the guy," he said distantly, deep in thought of his suspicions. I was a little confused. Less than a day ago, I sat beside Sasuke, hanging out with him when we were supposed to be in our own classes, and he had admitted that the punch I landed on him was good, well, indirectly, but more or less, he did. Everything was all right, then. He seemed nice now that we've got that truce going on. We might not be friends, but we're at the very least two people that acknowledged each other's existence. But take note, he seemed nice. But who knew what went on in that head of his? What kind of feeling? I asked as we approached Artland. I don't know, he answered uncertainly. Right now he's all about chance and change, but that's just a cover. Something's wrong with him. I just don't know what. That was the first window that had popped out of my screen the moment I had logged onto a computer in my graphics classroom, later that afternoon. And, with Sai's words causing a swarm of different opinions and sides within me, I was really not in the mood. In fact, I was pissed off. A second, more recent window popped up. I blinked again. Was it over? Well, I did play his little game, which was completely stupid, so, as was his part of the deal, he left. In a snap of a finger, he was gone. I was confused. What the hell? Type of confusion. I mean, what kind of game was that? Because, whatever it was foolish, as I've already said, and really useless, and frankly, it did not make much sense. No, it didn't make any sense at all. But the rogue was gone. I supposed that was all that mattered. I've always disliked the news. I was never one for current events. I found them dull and uninteresting and tedious and dry and every other word that was a synonym for boring. It's a good thing, adults always say, because it helps us teenagers become more aware of the current society, rather than simply revolving our own little world around a sun that was consisted of music, bands, high school drama, clothes, image, reputations, friends, backstabbers, crushes, boyfriends and girlfriends and everything else that kids between the age of 13 to 19 obsessed over. Naturally, I shared a similar opinion and attitude with the rest of the world's teenage population towards news reports that go on 24/7, day after day, broadcasting reports that were all alike with each other. Ironic how, in the morning news, they routinely begin by saying, "Good morning," and then carrying on by saying how it wasn't. They were as negative as they were off-putting. They publicized the world's melancholy, hunger in third world countries, civil wars tearing up a nation, terrorism, bombs, shootings, local accidents, which was what was currently on at the very moment, as I waited for the microwave to finish heating up my macaroni and cheese. An 18-wheeler drove around the corner. Apparently, it was too long to make the turn, and the wheels perched up the curve of the sidewalk, where the pedestrians stood waiting for the light to change to cross the street. Two obtained minor injuries, while a 17-year-old girl who was merely walking her way to school got caught in the truck and was crushed. She died on the scene, only earlier this morning. Witnesses suspect that she might have been pushed, although the police are denying that statement and say it was a mere accident. I stared at the flat my dad had attached to our living room wall just earlier this month, and with its widescreen feature, I could clearly see the scene of the accident being reported in the news. A huge truck was visible in the background of the street corner, filled with cops, ambulances, traffic officers, and a crowd of passers-by in search of gossip. A band of yellow tape surrounded the area, and in the center of it was a deformed body lying on the ground. I found it rather sick that they still hadn't taken the body and burnt it somewhere. No, instead they decided to leave the corpse out in the open like an exhibit for the Gore Museum. The camera showed a chain of different things. First the two injured pedestrians, then cops, then officers trying to maneuver traffic, then the truck, the people, and finally the body of the girl lying on the pavement, still bleeding. It was disgusting, and a definite wreck of appetite for my delicious mac and cheese, but I couldn't seem to tear my eyes away in spite of that. It wasn't long before I realized the reason why. The girl, her long black hair was matted with dry crimson, her body crushed and limbs angled awkwardly, sprawled just beside the sidewalk. Kintsuchi. She walked down the street with her chest popped, chin up, neck exposed, and a butt swaying from side to side. Everyone stared, though the male population was all that mattered to her. They checked her out, from naive little 12-year-old boys, to hot and sophisticated 30-year-old men, and horny teenage guys in between. Yes, they all gave her a once-over, twice, and some maybe 3 times. This was her strut, every single day, and Kin loved it, the glory and admiration, she loved it. She knew she was being bitch, but by human nature, that fact just tended not to matter anymore once all heads were turned and attention was focused on her and only her. Just as she was about to cross the street, the light for pedestrians changed from the walking man to the red hand sign that symbolized stop. Darn stop light, way to ruin the strut. People began to crowd alongside her as they waited to cross the street. They were completely ruining her look. Completely, it was too cramped up now, too warm to pose, and they were blocking the views of the hot males that were trying to check her out. Kin held her head up high and stood on one foot, making sure her hip and butt stuck out. Out of nowhere, a growling noise was heard, first faintly, though its volume began increasing over time. Turning towards the sound, she saw a truck heading towards their direction, and then unexpectedly, it turned right around the corner they stood in. Instinctively, Kin stepped back, narrowly missing the truck's massive wheels that would have crushed her $600 stilettos. All the people around her gasped as the rest of the truck's length drove around the corner, within a foot of crushing all of them. Kin got a hold of her posture and stood with her head up again, waiting for the stupid, friggin' truck to drive by already. Suddenly, she felt a slight pressure on her back. Originally, she thought it was some pervert trying to grope her, but the following words that were whispered huskily in her ear told her it wasn't. "This is from Sakura." The force on her back increased, and soon, she lost her balance and was thrown forwards. She heard a crack, a scream erupting from her own mouth, and then, an infinite sound of nothingness. As I made my way to the academy, my mind ended up dividing in two. One side thought about how the heck my parents could send me off to school, on foot, by myself merely because they were too lazy to get off the bed and drive me there instead. Furthermore, I didn't believe that jet lag from having to travel for company trips was a good enough reason to make their daughter walk to school, especially since they were well aware of autumn's 2-degree, early morning temperatures and its sub-zero wind chills that currently whipped past me. Another side thought about Kin, and, while I tried avoiding the thought of it, her death. A part of me couldn't believe she's gone. I mean, she's gone, as in, never coming back. Just like that. It had me wondering, where was she now? Was her ghost still among us? Did she feel pain? See her life flash before her just before she died? Or simply sudden blankness, and snap, she was gone? When she woke up this morning, did she feel anything? Like a premonition of some sort? Or was she completely, utterly clueless that she was going to die? These questions circulated my head as I made my way through the whirlwind of orange leaves that flew around abundantly, given that Konoha contained great woodlands with seemingly endless boundaries within its region, filled with innumerable, 100-year-old trees. Eventually, I found myself slumping down upon a chair in my first period class, biology. Ino, surprisingly, had taken the course as well, for the sole reason that she thought it'd be an easy class, given that I was there to help her through just about everything. This irrational thinking resulted in her being stuck in bio class, with countless experiments on liquids and chemicals that stained her clothes and bloody, gory dissections of animals and body organs that made her puke. She was already settled into her designated seat beside me. Ino was my lab partner, the most useless, girlish, puking lab partner I've ever had, with a grin that she couldn't seem to help but display on her face. That was unusually weird, considering all the facial expressions I've seen of Ino's in this class were distinct ones that hinted at disgust, revulsion, abhorrence and nausea. "What's with the dorky grin?" I whispered as our teacher began the lesson, handing out instructional worksheets for a dissection we were about to have in the next class. Rats. Joy. Guess, she said, still smiling. The rats we're gonna slice up escaped. I asked hopefully. Ino shook her head. Even better. I saw Shikamaru on the way here this morning. And, he's gonna help the rodents escape so we won't have to see their intestines on Thursday. Forget the rats. She snapped. I saw him, and he was with that girl again. I hate her already. She's always clinging on to him. Maybe he has a thing for older women. But then, it doesn't even look like he likes her company. I thought maybe he'll break up with her and ow. What the heck, Sak? She yelled when I pinched her arm. That was to wake you up from your daydream. She stuck her tongue out and was just about to retort something back when a buzz interrupted her, followed by a voice, obviously Tsunade's, from the PA system. Sorry for this interruption. Attention all Hidden Leaves students. As most of you may have already heard in the news, a fellow student of yours, Kinsuchi of 12th grade, had just passed away this morning on her way to school. Kin was a good pupil, and had a 4.0 average in her studies. We are incredibly sorry for the loss of a great student, and we mourn with her family for the loss of a great daughter. May we all rise for a moment of silence in the memory of Kinsuchi. Everyone in our class rose, but no one was silent. At once, murmurs broke out, despite our teacher's desperate attempts to silence us. Can you believe the bitch is actually gone? Ino asked, fighting a grin that was slowly forming on her lips. I don't know whether I'm gonna be sad or just break out doing the happy dance. Like me, Ino had never really been fond of Kin, okay, so she hated her, but mostly everyone did as well. The girl's guts and confidence and bitchiness were just too easy for us in the normal level of the social ladder to hate. The higher, more popular seniors, though, loved Kin and praised her so much it was stupid. To Ino's statement, I nodded, agreeing with her. I didn't want to feel elated by the fact that someone had just died because that's a little sick, no matter how mean and bitchy and a backstabber of a person that someone was, but all the same I couldn't help it. I've disliked Kin for so long that I simply didn't mind now that she was gone. In the corner of my eye, through the doorway of our classroom, of which the staff insisted on leaving open to give a friendlier, welcoming atmosphere to the school, I saw Dosu Kinuta being ushered through the hallway by a teacher, in all probability excused and headed for the counselor's office. Dosu, also known as the boy who had been with Abumi that time 4 years ago when they tried to beat up Sasuke. He was a student here at HLA, as he along with Abumi were both spoiled brats. It was no wonder why they found amusement in bullying the young Sasuke, who, then and now, had no family, no relatives, no anything. He was Kin's best friend, if Kin having a friend at all was even believable. I was guessing Dosu took it pretty hard, his best friend dying and all. I'd get all sad too if I were in his case. Actually, I'd probably be bawling my eyes out, no matter how loud and obnoxious and deafening and irritating my best friends were. Despite that, I'd probably do anything for Naruto and Ino. With Kin, though, that was a whole new case. It didn't affect me. It's a little insensitive, but there was no other way to say it truthfully without being uncaring. I remembered my last conversation with the rogue. It was only yesterday afternoon that I'd been talking about how I'd kill Kin if I could kill anyone. And now, ta-da. She's dead. Mental powers. I wished. It was quite a coincidence though. Weird. Really weird. I shuddered. By the second period, everyone knew about Kin's death, bearing in mind that its announcement was publicized to the entire school, and by lunchtime, everyone was talking about it. Some were even crying, which was pathetic as it was surprising, in the view of the fact that I've never seen Kin with any real friends, except perhaps Dosu, but he had been excused for the rest of the day. Whether he was actually that depressed or was only using it as an excuse to skip out of class, I didn't know. It was rather maddening though, to turn around in every corner, to walk down every hallway, and hear someone whispering about the same subject matter over and over again. It wouldn't last, that, I knew for sure. It was only a matter of 2 or 3 days' time until people got tired and moved on to the next available hearsay, forgetting all about kin in the process. At the same time, to escape the never-ending chatter in the hallways, I segregated myself in the library, a place I've frequently been in for the past week, and logged on, something I've frequently been doing for the past week, as well. The first thing I cited was Rogue's bolded screen name under the online list. The first thing I did was ignore what I'd just seen, though that proved evidently ineffective seeing as, a second later, I received a message from the very person. Darkness engulfed my whole being, and I prayed it would entirely as I curled among the concealing shadows, hoping that in the process I would be masked as well. The only source of light that enabled me to see at least the vaguest shapes was a narrow gap between the two slightly ajar doors, giving me viewable access no matter how murky that view might be to the rest of the study. The closet was tiny, and with its walls so near my body, closing in on all sides, I was beginning to feel claustrophobic. My breathing grew ragged and loud as a result of my newfound fear of close confinements. I wanted to get out there, but knew I couldn't, unless I wanted to run into him. He was here. Either he was still outside or now inside the house. He was here, no less than several steps from finding me. I cowered further into the shadows as this thought crossed my mind. I realized I was shaking, and unlike earlier, it was not merely my hands that shook, but my entire body. It wouldn't stop. I wanted to stop trembling, for the reason that instability would cause me to be careless, and carelessness would make noise. I had to stay silent, stay hidden, at least until help came, which I silently begged that it would. Sasuke better not be dismissed by emergency call as a joke. Looking through the narrow slit between the closet doors, I scanned the mini office. The room was empty, of course. I'd locked the doors before retreating in the closet. Still, as I peeked through, I couldn't elude the fear of finding someone staring right back at me. I shuddered at the thought, and then rested my gaze upon the door. It was still, and I wished it would remain that way. Each passing second felt like an hour in this closet. It was hardly silent. Outside, the wind continued to howl and trees continued to batter against the windows, occasionally causing me to jump. Not to mention my not-so-quiet hyperventilation. I shut my eyes and forced down the panic, hoping to somehow calm down as I tried to block out the background noises. It was in the middle of meditation that I heard it, though faint sounds, I knew what they were. A soft creak. The slow opening of the front door. As an automatic response, my head snapped up, with ears alert and eyes wide open, straining and dreading in unison to hear for any other resonance. This time, however, I did not hear any more. Nothing but the loud and rapid thud-thud-thud-thud of my heart ringing in my ears, deafening me. It seemed there was nothing I could do, no calming lie I could tell myself that would efficiently silence the palpitation. My heart was uncontrollable. Thud-thud-thud-thud-thud-thud-thud-thud. Thump. I froze. That was not my heartbeat. Surreptitious footsteps sounded from the living room. Sakura, I gasped at the low, cautious voice that had whispered my name from a distance. A creak was heard from each step of the stair, one by one, as whoever it was made his way up the second level of the house, nearing my location inch by inch. Anyone here? Recoiling deeper within the closet until my back came in contact with the wall, I shut my eyes again and buried my face in my hands, as though the deed would in some way make me invisible, make me safe and out of this circumstance. Why hadn't I locked the door? I began to regret. And why hadn't I bothered to pay attention when Dad told me where they were going? If I made a run for it, which I doubt I had the guts to do, where would I go? Who could I call? I didn't even know if my parents were still in the country, or whether they'd already taken a plane across the world for another one of their company trips. Sakura, where are you? My heart skipped a beat. He was on the top of the stairs already. I could tell by the nearness of his voice. With every step closer, the floorboards creaked beneath his feet, something I wouldn't normally observe, but fretfulness had me jumping from every sound my ears managed to hear. I shifted with restlessness as he made his way down the hall at an ever so gradual pace. I heard the door to my bedroom open, and then a few seconds later, so did the door to the master's bedroom. One by one, I heard each door creak. The 2 spare rooms we had in the house. The storage room. The bathroom. The entryway that leads to the attic. And finally, the study, the room I was currently in. From the narrow gap of the closet doors, I watched, afraid, as the doorknob slowly twisted and clicked as the lock did its job. It twisted again as the person on the other side tried once more to open it, and the same thing happened. Sakura. I flinched, wondering how long it would take for him to break down the door. I cowered with vulnerability. He found me. Hey, you there. The handle budged. Open the door. I couldn't move. Sakura. The lock on the doorknob clinked and clanked. It's me. It's safe. And suddenly familiarity dawned on me. Sakura. He tried the door once more, harsher. Are you there? Open the door. Sakura. Instantly, I stumbled onto my feet and bolted out of the closet, glad to be free from the wardrobe's tight confinements. Open the damn door, Sakura. Shortly after the lock was undone and the door swung open, I looked up to find a very anxious Uchiha standing in the entryway. The moment he saw me, relief instantly flooded him, and I could say the same about myself. The sensation came crashing down a little too much and too quickly that I soon felt tears stinging my eyes. I thought you were dead or something. Then, observing me from head to toe, Sasuke snidely remarked, you look worse than dead, though. How sensitive. My only response, however, was a silent gape, trying but failing to form coherent words while still overwhelmed by the sudden force of relief that had just hit me. Sensing my inability to converse, Sasuke grabbed my shoulders and began shaking me. I don't know what the hell he expected out of that, but it sure wasn't helping. Snap out of it. Did you see anyone? I asked, my voice unusually raspy. Sasuke didn't seem to hear me, or, if he did so, had completely ignored my question. He looked up and turned in all directions, his eyes warily scanning every inch of darkness they gazed upon, looking for any sign of an unknown presence hiding beneath the black blanket. After a moment, he muttered, "Come on," and shoved me forward. He led me down the wide and curving stairs, its bottom ending just to the side of the living room, and I was still quite shaken by the time he pushed me, and roughly might I add, on one of the couches, as though this wasn't my own home and I didn't know where to sit. Either that or he thought I was mentally handicapped and unable to act on my own, though at the moment, I sort of was, there or thereabouts. Just after he dumped me on the sofa so quickly like I was a living contagious disease, he ordered, "Stay here." I looked at him with a question, to which he responded by explaining, "I'll check the house." He walked off, and then stopped just at the foot of the stairway, where he must have spotted the long, wooden object leaning against the corner nearby the steps. A baseball bat. It had been my dad's when he used to play. Reluctance visibly waved over him, something I found rather strange, as took the bat. After a lingering glance at my direction, he disappeared out the back door. Yet again, I was alone, single-handed in the unlit living room. It occurred to me that I should have switched on the lights, or at least made Sasuke do it while he was still here. The control was on the other side of the room, opposite from where I currently sat, but I didn't dare stand up and cross the room on my own. I fiddled with my fingers, mindlessly picking on the couch's leather covering. Where was Sasuke? He was taking too long. No, wait. I glanced at the wall clock. It was dark, but there was enough light emitted from the moon and through the luminous curtains to tell where the hands pointed. It had only been a minute and a half since he'd gone. But in this state of anxiousness, it felt as though each minute was multiplied by the dozen. Every furniture cast shadows of its own, altogether forming odd, non-patterned shapes in various sizes. One in the corner by the flat TV and the curtains appeared to form a vague outline of a man, which scared the living crap out of me, despite knowing it was only other shadows randomly adjoined together. I turned away before the man-like outline got to my head. I was already freaked out enough, thank you very much. The disturbing atmosphere of my surroundings made me regret ever letting Sasuke leave. As a result, I had to endure another torment in the dark, and I never even knew I was afraid of darkness until then. Alright, now Sasuke was taking too long. It had been 3 minutes since he left. It didn't take that long to search for a house, did it? What if something happened to him? What if someone was actually inside the house, and had hurt Sasuke? Or, worse, what if he hurt me, perhaps even killed me? He could do so, swiftly and silently, and Sasuke would not even suspect a thing. He'd only see my lifeless body bleeding on the ground with, I don't know, a knife sticking out of my throat perhaps. What if he was right here, right now, in the room with me, merely invisible to my sight? With that thought, I looked around on impulse, and it didn't take long before my gaze landed on the corner where I'd imagined the human-like silhouette. It was still there. Though I knew it was all in my head, I watched it carefully and fearfully as a part of me screamed, "Look away, Sakura. Look away." I stared at the silhouette, in the back of my head expecting it to move, to slowly walk out of its hiding place, revealing him, and then, "Sakura!" I shrieked. Sasuke, who had appeared quite out of nowhere and was now standing a few feet behind me, jumped, literally. "Jesus!" he exclaimed, wholly startled, freaking calm down. "You scared me." With an annoyed eye-roll gesture, he made his way to the kitchen and began rummaging every corner, every dark patch, every possible hideaway. "Are you always home alone like this? My parents are out, somewhere. In some fancy restaurant." Huh. Sasuke noticed my puzzlement and waved a small piece of paper he had in hand, found this note on the counter. "There's a number here too." Right. A note. I hadn't thought of checking the house for any sort of note even though that was quite the custom in this family. As he read the note, Sasuke put no effort into hiding the scowl on his face. With disgust, he stated, "The Hyuga dinner party. You know about that. I know it's a banquet that Neji wasn't invited to, even though it's a family celebration." He didn't even get informed. The brief show of emotion surprised me. It was as though he hated the Hyugas for leaving Neji out, and I couldn't formulate any reason as to why he would even care. He stood up straight before I could ask him and closed the cupboard with a kick. "No one's here." I shook my head, "That can't be." "Hey, I checked the whole house, all right. And when I got here, I looked around the yard. Front and back. No one. And it's raining. So there's gotta be footprints on the mud, right? But I saw nothing." At the mention of rain, it was only then that I noticed the obvious fact that Sasuke was soaked to the skin, wearing a watered-down navy blue jacket that seemed more suitable for an early morning in springtime than a stormy night of November. The counter he was leaning against was slowly forming small pools of rainwater dripping from his clothes, and then, looking further up, I noticed his hair. Its characteristic, natural spikes were now flattened by the water, sticking to his face. I couldn't help but take note of how his pale skin complemented the blackness of his hair. "He'd probably left then," I said before getting carried away by my thoughts, "but he was here. I know someone was. I'm sure of it." He studied me for a moment. Then, quietly, he said, "You're not making this up, are you?" "No," I exploded. "So he just completely disappeared, without a trace," he concluded with mock. Without giving me enough time to reply, he continued, "You want to know what I think?" "No, but I had a feeling he was gonna tell me either way." "I think you just got freaked out." I mean, I can see why. You're alone. It's a big, empty house, in the middle of the night. There's a storm. And, well, you seem like a pretty gutless type of girl. I twitched. So you got scared, and imagined someone breaking in and all that. It's all in your head. I could tell he was hinting at madness, but I wasn't insane and I wasn't making it up. He didn't know the fact that the rogue had actually described the city, streets, the front yard and the porch, and even the make of the stairway, each description too specific and correct to simply be a lucky guess. I'm not making it up. I cried in an attempt to make him believe me, though the act itself must persuade him to do otherwise. I was acting quite insane. Calming down, I tried again, this time, in a soft, insistent whisper, I'm not making it up. He stared at me, frowning in contemplation, perhaps debating in his mind whether or not I was telling the truth, whether or not I was going mad. After a moment's thought, he growled in irritation. Why the hell did I come here in the first place? He muttered under his breath, though I heard it clearly amid the house's silence. Without thinking, I asked, why did you? I don't know. He replied, frustrated, more to himself than me. He glared at me, as though it was my fault. Well, partly it was, but he was the one who chose to come, and to a certain extent, rather heroically. The thought of having my personal knight in shining armor would have been thrilling and romantic, if only it weren't for the fact that that said knight was currently giving me a death glare. Why did you call me? I don't know, I replied, mimicking him, when in truth I really didn't. Edging between the state of fear and panic, and the computer being the closest contact device to me at that moment, I had clicked the first screen name I spotted when I opened my messenger. I had typed in, help, before I even realized I was talking to Sasuke. When I did notice though, I hadn't cared much, because, truly, I was desperate. Don't ask how I forgot all about the phone in 911, or how I managed to spot Sasuke's name and call for his help when all the while Gaara had been online as well. My actions at that time were based on instincts rather than consciousness, driven by fear, and instincts told me to call on Sasuke. Then we're even. Sasuke dismissed, and I didn't argue, the subject was overly awkward to continue anyway. I shuddered, suddenly chilled as an unexpected wind breezed past me. It reminded me of elderly myths where the coldness was due to the presence of the non-living. Not that there were any ghosts in my house or so I believed, but in the darkness of the night and the limited amount of luminosity from the moon, it might as well have been so, since the atmosphere about the house screamed haunted anyway. Hey, Sasuke, I called out, feeling giddy of my current surroundings. I tried reminding myself that it was my own home in the dark and was the same as it was every morning. It was rather hard to convince myself though, when darkness had me surrounded. The lights in the kitchen had been turned on at some time when Sasuke had been searching through it, but the living room, where I was left unlit. Only a little amount of light from the other room reached it, giving just enough to create even more shadows. I shivered as the cold whipped around me once more. Can you turn on the lights? Sasuke looked at me in a strange manner, which soon turned into irritation. I suppose he was still brooding, and his temper still short, about having to be dragged all the way here for absolutely nothing, in his opinion. You've got legs, haven't you? Use them. What's stopping you? The fact that my limbs are temporarily paralyzed. I said, half lying. It was the truth, although it wasn't the reason I didn't get up. I glanced at the light switch on the other side of the room, across the several feet of darkness I'd have to cross to get there. Sasuke caught me looking. Yeah, well, I don't think so. I think it's 'cause you're still scared shitless. Regardless of the criticism, he pushed himself up and walked toward the switch, turning it on. In less than a second, the whole room broke out in brightness. I shut my eyes close at the sudden illumination. I opened them after a while as my eyes adjusted, shuddering in the process as another cold breeze enveloped my body and found Sasuke frowning at me. He then redirected his attention to a spot not far away to his right. The curtains over it waved somewhat violently, compelled by the strong winds from outside. It hadn't done that earlier, nor were there winds either. Suddenly, Sasuke was reaching for the curtain on which, I realized, I'd imagined the man-like outline out of the shadows. With the lights now turned on, those shadows had faded away, the outline disappearing along with it. Though that relieved me, wariness still clung onto my nerves, and I didn't want Sasuke shoving that curtain open in any way, in the fear of what waited behind it. Sasuke's hand gripped the fabric, though before I could voice out a protest and stop him, he heaved them aside. There was nothing, or no one. Just the sight of a casement window left slightly open. That was where the wind must have been coming from. Sasuke's frown deepened at what he saw. I thought I told you to close all the windows. He asked, slightly demanding. I did. I said defensively, my eyes unable to lift from the opened window which I couldn't remember opening. But I was in a hurry. The moment Sasuke had logged off earlier on that night, in fact only half an hour ago, I'd practically scurried my way about the house in an attempt to do everything he said to do. Turn off the lights, close windows. I had done just that in a swift, clumsy manner. I didn't even want to head down anyway, because, if any part of this was true, then the rogue would have been just outside my front door. But I followed Sasuke's instructions anyway. I needed to follow something, needed someone to lead me, because at that moment I was unable to lead myself. I made a point of avoiding the door as much as possible, keeping a safe distance away in case someone came barging in uninvited, while I shut all the windows and lights. Within 10 seconds, I was stumbling up the stairs to my safer zone, though nowhere really felt safe at that point. I had gone to the study, transformed into my dad's at-home office, locked the door and hid in a closet filled with stacks of files and binders rather than clothes. Due to my panic and hurriedness, I must have missed that particular windowsill and left it open, albeit I was sure I'd gone and shut every single one, though I must have missed one, given that there was no other rational explanation. Sasuke sighed in frustration and closed the window, in the process stopping the cold wind from breaking in, and for that I was slightly thankful. Turning to face me, he leaned against the wall, a habit of his I supposed, you know, the leaning on stuff. As if he couldn't just sit down on the couch that was 2 feet away from him. Close your windows next time, okay? I nodded at his demand. And following that, silence. He made no move to leave. He didn't even appear to have any intention of leaving, but he did seemingly intend to lean against the wall for hours. Yet there was no objection on my side. I needed the company, no matter if it was Sasuke's. I just needed something to distract me from tonight's events, which still had me shivering whenever I recalled the rogue's messages, or how close he had been to entering my house, if he was even here at all, if anything he ever said was true. I was beginning to get the notion that he never really was here, I mean, the rogue. Maybe all that he said had been a coincidence, in a very specific, correct, freaky way. Staring at Sasuke proved to be an effective distraction. He was looking to his side, refusing to meet my eye, with his arms crossed on his chest defiantly. A look of petulance was evident on his face, as if he didn't want to be here in the first place, like he was forcefully dragged here, which was ironic, since even though he was forced to be here, and that every part of him probably did not want to be here, he didn't give the impression of leaving anytime soon. Which was okay. I didn't want him to leave. Merely the sight of him was interesting. Anyone would have told me to just take a picture, because it would last longer. But a two-dimensional picture wouldn't have done justice to how he looked in real life. There he was, looking all tough and tall and strong. Although slouching, he still looked tall, which made him look strong, making him look tough. It all was chained together. I found it hard to believe that this guy who I've held personal dislike towards for years had been kind of like my hero for the night, coming to the rescue, just in time, quickly, here, to me. I paused, as all of a sudden questions stormed about my brain. How did he get here so fast? How did he know where I lived? And how did he? Sasuke, I said cautiously, peering up through narrowed, doubt-filled eyes. He looked at me. How did you get inside the house? I whispered. Oh, that. Sasuke shrugged. You left your door unlocked. Deja vu. Scratch my second thoughts. The rogue had been here after all. Nara Shikamaru. Where the hell have you been? The brunette couldn't help but blurt out at the sight of Uchiha. In his daily life, almost everything passed as uninteresting to Shikamaru. The classes, sessions, counseling, having to deal with dim-witted, 12-year-old minded housemates, stupid googly-eyed and stupid girls, the ever-so-useless and exceedingly easy homework. Shikamaru's life consisted of the most wearisome things that he made a point of tuning out each day. There were only a few things that caught his attention, one of them being this certain attractive blonde, and, no, it's not Naruto if anyone was wondering, yet even then, it would only be a short matter of time before he got bored and fell asleep. However, the sight of Uchiha sneaking into the room and climbing through the window as quietly as possible, dripping wet from head to toe at 3:30 in the morning, instantly hooked on Shikamaru's curiosity, and there was no chance he'd let this occurrence pass by without knowing the story behind it. It was not every day that Uchiha Sasuke broke the rigorous rules of this house, and the itch to know what had driven him to do so formed within the Shikamaru. There was no need for his genius assessment to tell that Sasuke had been out without permission, moreover past the curfew. Uchiha jumped in surprise, swirling around to find his brunette roommate still awake, and was watching him amusedly with a raised eyebrow. Be quiet, he whispered harshly. You are so busted, Shikamaru remarked wittily in a normal volume, which seemed to be amplified thrice in the dead silence of the night. He was enjoying this. Ignoring him, the Uchiha trudged over to his side of the room and began taking out dry clothes from his drawers. Do you know what'll happen if Hitaki finds out you've been sneaking out? Shikamaru called out just as Sasuke had reached the bathroom. Glaring at him, the Uchiha hissed threateningly, well, he's not gonna find out, 'cause no one's telling him. And closed the door, not slam, as it would have awoken the others. Shikamaru waited until Sasuke left the washroom. So where'd you go? He asked conversationally. None of your damn business. Sasuke snapped, and no idiot would have missed the fact that the Uchiha was in a bad mood. Well, except perhaps Naruto. Or Kiba. He was just as thick-headed. Yeah, until I go rat you out on Hitaki first thing in the morning. That'd be quite troublesome. Sasuke glared. What do you want? Just curious as to where you've been. Sasuke was silent, as if contemplating whether or not to tell him. Just when Shikamaru thought Sasuke would not answer though, he did. Sakura's. Shikamaru blinked, surprised at Uchiha's sudden bluntness, though more surprised at this unexpected response. So many reasons why he could have been at the pink chick's house, yet Shikamaru didn't know which one to assume. She needed some help. Sasuke explained hesitantly. And, I guess you can say I gave her a hand. Oh, I see, Shikamaru said, although he didn't really. What exactly had Uchiha done in Sakura's house that lasted all night? As if sensing his thoughts, Sasuke called out, Nara. Uchiha gave him a pointed look. I didn't sleep with her, if that's what you're wondering, you sick bastard. That wasn't what I was thinking. Sure, Uchiha said, the syllable hinting clearly that he didn't believe him. As he climbed onto his bed, he called out, and Nara. What? This never happened. Got it. Shikamaru rolled his eyes. Whatever. I looked out the window of my first period classroom distractedly, delighted at the sight of the sun beaming its rays upon every little surface that was exposed in the area. It's easy to appreciate the small things when you'd just recently experienced the longest night of your life. I don't think I've ever been as happy as I was this morning to see light peeking through the track blinds of my room when I woke up. Surprisingly, I was able to survive the night before, alive and intact. Sasuke hadn't left right away, after I told him to wait at least until the storm outside had ceased a little. Truthfully though, I just didn't want to be alone. That wait took a long time, filled with awkward silences and unconscious staring competitions. No one had tried to start up a conversation. We simply remained in the lounge watching TV sitcoms that neither of us was really paying attention to, surprisingly sitting on one couch but unsurprisingly positioned in opposite ends, the farthest distance from each other as the seat would allow, with a bowl of popcorn sitting solitarily in between. It was perhaps the dullest and most awkward movie night of my life. Sasuke hung about for another hour or so, and waited until the storm subsided before leaving. The rain, however, continued to fall in sprinkles, and I had a feeling it'd go on overnight. With a final check-up in and around the house to ensure me, Sasuke departed into the downpour with only a jacket that wasn't even waterproof, and that had already been drenched in the first place. As he disappeared into the early morning rainfall, I closed the door and locked it shut securely. A part of me felt safe after that last circulation to make sure I was really alone in the abode, whereas another part of me felt doubtful. Eventually, as the long night began to weigh on my eyelids, I gave up and simply chose to feel safe because the option took lesser effort and surrendered to the fatigue that clung and drew down my consciousness. I'd fallen asleep the moment my head hit the pillows, already at 3:30 in the morning. I'd set aside my thoughts on Sasuke for later on and allowed sleep to take me away. Now, presently, as I was fully awake and coherent, yet bored and distracted from today's chemistry lesson, thoughts on Sasuke came tumbling back into my mind. How he'd gotten inside wasn't much of a mystery anymore. I'd left my door unlocked, he'd told me so, and in the process confirming the rogue's last assertion. What was a little mystifying was how he knew where I lived, when I was certain I had never told him that certain information. In addition, the last move my family had was 4 years ago, just after Sasuke had been expelled from school. I never saw him again after that, until now of course, therefore leaving no way he could have found out where I moved next. And how did he arrive so fast? He came within 10 minutes, on foot, I might add. Did that mean he lived only 5 minutes away? I didn't think so. Sasuke, from what I currently knew of him, lived in a group home, and there were definitely no group homes within the estate. He couldn't have come from any of the houses here, for the reason that, well, he didn't seem the type to spend time in such areas, given that around the clock he looked like a kid whose official hangout were the streets and back alleys. The first and second periods passed by gradually and uneventfully, a good thing, I admitted, since I was completely distracted throughout the morning, trying to think of plausible ways that Sasuke could have gotten to my house so fast. Flying was cancelled, and so was driving. If Sasuke was under probation like Kakashi had mentioned, his license should be suspended. Not that he'd be able to afford a car anyway. Coming up blank with no logical reason, I decided to question him about it later, that being the easiest, most obvious method to get answers. Thus, as the bell rang for lunch, I rushed out the door and towards my locker, stuffing my bag and books inside. If I was going to search the entire academy, squeezing through the halls along with its 2,000 student population, I'd like to do so empty-handed, without a drag. In less than a minute I was off to look for Sasuke. Though he wasn't in the fields playing games or training dogs, as per his customary location, because of his tall stature, the distinctively noticeable hairstyle, and his attention-grabbing all-black attire, Sasuke hadn't been hard to spot at all. I found him standing by a row of lockers across the hall from the counselor's office, in the company of 3 of his fellow delinquent friends, not talking, and not really listening to the others' animated chatting. Don't ask how I got the courage to walk straight to them without faltering for even a second, or one hesitant step back, but I did. Maybe it was the need I felt for answers or the puzzlement in my brain. Either way, I was heading towards Sasuke's direction, progressively closing in, and the intimidating aspect of it hadn't yet occurred to me. When Sasuke turned away, it was his friends that noticed me first. I recognized each of them without much difficulty. The white-eyed brunette was obviously Hinata's cousin. The other brunette was most likely to be Shikamaru, the guy Ino was currently head over heels for, and the last one Kiba, talking and was at the moment being ignored, who I'd already met once. Upon spotting me, the voluble boy reacted with exaggeration as his canine eyes widened and his lips parted to gawk. Needless to say, the strange expression caused the other two to turn in my direction. At the sight of me, I saw a spark of recognition in all of their faces. Clearly, they already knew who I was, while I barely knew them. It was awkward, strange and creepy bundled all together in one odd sentiment on my end. Snapping out of his trance-like gawking state, Kiba punched Sasuke in the arm and nodded over to my direction. "Guess who's coming?" Shikamaru muttered under his breath, and though it was barely a whisper, the low warning immediately had Sasuke whirling around. He frowned, not a bad frown though, more like an amused "what are you doing" sort of frown. Suddenly, a glitch on my rope of confidence sputtered and became known, and soon I was faltering, but, realistically, who wouldn't upon heading towards four fairly, somewhat and slightly attractive guys who watched your every move as you approached, their gazes wide with curiosity like a magnifying glass. It was pretty intimidating. But geez, bearing in mind that this was Sasuke, Kiba, someone who I've met once before and who owned a really cute dog, my friend's cousin, and my best friend's newfound crush, they actually weren't total strangers. Nevertheless, as fight or flight kicked in and my instincts perfunctorily chose flight, I found myself walking right by, staring ahead without a word, as if I hadn't only a second ago been headed towards their spot. A few moments passed behind me. I felt no movement, no muttering words or stifled laughter. Before the triumphant sensation spread throughout my body, however, a strong grip landed on my shoulder, twirling me back around. I spun along with the action, surrendering to the fact that I was not going to get away with a gesture as weird as walking up to them and chickening out at the last second. Sasuke gazed down on me, eyes painted with smears of amusement. "Haruno. Oh, we were back on the last name basis now, huh? Well, that was fine with me. I didn't even know why we began to call each other like we were friends in the first place." "Oh, hey," I greeted, my pathetic attempt to act surprised. No one was fooled, obviously, in view of the fact that I had stared right at them when I approached, only swerving sharply to the right at the very last moment. Sasuke, still with his hand firmly gripping my shoulders, as though I'd run away if he let go, something I'd probably do, glanced at his friends and shot a meaningful look that read, "Scram," repeatedly in big, bold letters. They got the silent message. Shikamaru rolled his eyes. Neji snickered. Kiba winked at me, awkward, really, and with their strange responses, the three scurried away under the Uchiha's gaze, which had only this minute turned into a glare as he caught his friend's reactions. Once they were gone, Sasuke shifted back to me. "Hey, hi," I greeted again. I'm so pathetic. I could tell he thought so too by the way he stared at me. "What's up?" "Nothing. You." He gave me a look, one that clearly said socializing hadn't been his point, one that also clearly said he had no intentions of telling me what was up. I was the one who came to him, despite my stupid plan to retreat. "Okay, so something's been bothering me." He turned and began walking away. Before I could call out, "Jerk," he turned his head back, his eyes impatient. Quickly, I understood the signal and scuttled my way next to him. We were strolling next alongside each other for the second time now, though where we were currently headed towards, I had no idea. "How did you know where I lived?" I asked, unable to prevent the reproachful tone that came along with the question. Gaara, he said straightforwardly. Gaara, you met him sometime last week, didn't you? Heard he walked you home. He did, I said, befuddled at the censorious tone that coated his last statement, making sound almost like an accusation. He's nice, I added, triggering an eye roll on Sasuke's end. How did you get there so fast? I went on, I mean, you probably live pretty far. And then you had to look for my house. So how come you came so fast? It hadn't even been 20 minutes since you logged off the computer. Why are you complaining? He shot back, manifestly goaded by my cross-examination. Just be glad I got there quick enough to keep you from going insane. I'd say to keep you from getting hurt, but it turns out the "someone's breaking in" story was all crap. It wasn't crap, I retorted, and I'm not complaining. Just wondering. He repeated, you sure you're only wondering? What else would it be? Doubt, suspicious, mistrust, and the list went on and on. I think you're paranoid, he pointed out. I am not. And you're avoiding the question. I'm not avoiding the question. I was, around. I reiterate in disbelief, and what, you just happened to be carrying a laptop in your pocket. No, he snapped, halting to turn and glare at me. I was at an internet cafe a few blocks from your house. They have this thing called a wireless internet. Ever heard of it? I was there for a project, because Kankuro was hogging up the computer at home. Would you like to know what I ordered too? Never mind, I muttered, unconsciously taking a step away from the enraged Uchiha. Forget it. Well, I wasn't forgetting anything. You couldn't blame me for naturally finding it suspicious how Sasuke hadn't arrived so fast. Maybe he'd been much nearer than the coffee shop he claimed he was at last night. Could it be that the reason he'd gotten to my house so fast was because he was already there in the first place? I fought the ugly suspicions initiating in my head. You thought that rogue guy was going to break in, didn't you? His abrupt question surprised me, and the startled look evidently visible on my face gave him the confirmation he needed. I stared at him questioningly, and he shrugged in response. I just figured. You just figured. I repeated accusingly. Figured how? I knew he knew about a certain stranger who wouldn't leave me alone on the internet, but how did he come up with the conclusion that it was the same person I thought was going to break inside the house? Unless, of course, he already knew, or he was. I shook my head. Sasuke was right. I really was paranoid. And it's getting to my head. I headed home right away after school, walking with Ino until a fork in the trail separated us in two different routes. The garage had been empty when I arrived at the house, which only meant that my parents were out, but within the city, they wouldn't have taken the car if their destination wasn't within driving distance. Reaching my room, I quickly changed into something more comfortable, grabbed a quick snack from the kitchen, and went back to my room, where the first thing I'd done was turn on my LCD, being that I had no homework for the day. The very first thing that popped up on my desktop was, "Hey Saw." Alarmed, I dropped my pen, my fingers unconsciously letting go of the ballpoint. Standing beside the lab table I was situated behind was Ino, who stared at me with a quivering eyebrow and a hand on her hip. "What's wrong with you?" she asked, as though I grew another head out of the blue. "You startled me," I reasoned out meekly, reaching down to grab the writing implement that was laid on the floor. "Good morning." Although I already knew who had spoken, as it couldn't have been anyone else but the teacher, my head snapped up as reflexes kicked in, only to hear a muted thud as I collided with the desk. I ducked again instinctively to get as far away from the desk as possible, whilst moaning and massaging the back of my now aching skull. As I busied myself tending the resultant injuries of my clumsiness, which, this morning, appeared to have increased perhaps thrice or more, the barefaced sound of laughter erupted in the background, along with occasional, "ouch," and "stupid," and "that's gotta hurt," remarks here and there from my fellow classmates. To my rescue, the teacher soon hushed the crowd, and it wasn't long before their attentions were forced to divert upon the topics of animal biology, and today's dissection, rats. Ino's focus remained on me though, with a look that clearly showed her attempt not to burst out laughing. Well, someone's certainly jumpy this morning. I had a lot of coffee. You don't drink coffee, idiot. She rebutted. What's up? Late night. I tried again. Up front, our teacher had pulled out a box of rats and was about to begin their distribution. This was enough to shut her up. Bio elapsed slowly, or was it the opposite? I really had no way of knowing, seeing as paying attention wasn't something I seemed capable of doing today. The teacher's lecturing words only blurred together in a big, incomprehensible blur of words whenever I tried focusing. I already gave up trying to do just that halfway through the class. Instead of keeping my mind on the dead rodent sliced open before me, I passed time by looking out the window that was adjacent to my seat. I wasn't daydreaming though, or zoned out like I was whenever my eyes wandered off the sheet of glass. My reason this time was utterly different. I wasn't distant, nor in a daze like the custom, but instead I was wide awake, my senses heightened, on alert, vigilantly watchful, though what I was watching out for, I wasn't quite sure. I found myself scanning every little corner of the school student parking lot, the only view of the window, looking for every possible hiding place in the surrounding area. I saw to it that no one lurked about in unusual places, or, if there was, made sure they weren't secretly stealing glances at my direction. If an unknown person at least casted a glance at me, the sirens in my head went off every time, and the thought that they might be the rogue arose in my mind. I was that paranoid. I was unusually jumpy this morning, as said by Ino, but it wasn't as though the cautiousness was within my control. I seemed to be reacting to every little thing I heard or saw at the moment. For example, the irritating spins and tricks of Ino's pen around and around her finger. How the student beside us repetitively, inquisitively poked at the rat's guts with tweezers, or how I heard every stroke of marker on the whiteboard as the teacher wrote down notes. In general, whether the class itself went by slowly or quickly, bio had been torture, and by the looks of things, I could already say the same thing about how the rest of the day would turn out. My eyes darted everywhere, left and right, front and back, up and down, as I made my way through the hallways after class. I jumped to conclusions every time I'd caught someone looking at me, which was actually pretty often, considering that my odd behavior only attracted other people's attention. That, of course, had only made things worse. Unconsciously, I increased my pace. The more I tried getting out of the crowded halls, the more attention I got. The more attention I got, the more I tried getting out. It was a pointless, unbreakable cycle. Then, I felt it. Eyes. On me. There were a number of them, although only one stood out among the rest. This pair was watchful, steady, unwavering, observing, unlike the usual curious glances I got from the rest of the student body as I squeezed my way through the pack. I shuddered as the feeling only grew stronger, without any way of telling who the gaze belonged to. There were too many people. I kept on walking, hoping to elude that lingering sentiment, but to no avail. It remained. I couldn't even tell which direction it came from. I just knew in my guts that someone was staring, no, watching me. It was just one of those things that you know. Sakura. I jumped, whirling my head around to see Ino and Sai running as they tried catching up to me. Where are you going? Ino shrieked just as she had steadied her breathing back to normal. My attention, though, was focused more on the latter individual that settled himself beside Ino, his amused eyes on me. I was slightly surprised at the sight of them walking together. I looked at him questioningly, searching his eyes for any explanation whatsoever. Maybe he liked her. I mean, he had called Ino beautiful, and me a hag. That jerk. But I received nothing back but a blank, non-beneficial smile. Hey, I greeted, turning my attention back towards Ino. I was heading to my locker. You passed by your locker 2 hallways and a floor ago. What is up with you? I opened my mouth to reply, but as if knowing the lie I was about to blurt out, Ino interrupted, I know something's bothering you. I'm not stupid. What's up, Sakura? Tell me, girl. Spill. Sai stared at me with a curious look. I think someone might be following me, I said to her, although she didn't gasp like I expected her to. Instead, she raised an eyebrow as if I was a 5-year-old who had just told her she secretly had superpowers. Annoyed, I added, for real. How do you know? I don't. I can feel it. You don't even know. If I did, I would have broken his nose by now. Sai smirked, then, he'd be in the hospital and he wouldn't be following me. No, I don't know who he is. I just know. With that said, my eyes subconsciously darted across the hall, looking about for anything off. In the corner of my vision, I spotted a dark, distant shadow of a person. Before I could focus on it, Ino spoke again. It could just be nerves, you know, she said. No, I shook my head, wondering if it really was only nerves. I looked for the figure I'd seen through the mass of students that blocked my view. I'm totally freaked, Ino. Man, I would be too. She commented unhelpfully, good luck with that. Maybe it's just a secret admirer. Yeah, I muttered distractedly, still searching, maybe. Though I knew it wasn't. Well, gotta get to class. Ino piped cheerfully, see ya. I waved and realized Sai hadn't left. I looked up at him. It's probably not big, he said, shrugging. See ya, hag. With that, Sai walked off, leaving me in the midst of the student horde. It was the second after he'd wholly disappeared into the crowd that I realized he hadn't gone the same direction Ino had headed to. And there it was again. That feeling of a gaze boring right into the back of my head. In a swift movement, I turned around, alarmed, as my eyes moved in all directions, frantically searching for anyone who looked suspicious enough. Eventually my gaze landed upon the spot where I'd earlier noticed a blurred outline of a person. It was a good distance away, lengthwise on the other side of the hallway where a figure of mystique stood leaning against the corner, its head turned unmistakably in my direction. Squinting, I was able to see a bit more clearly. It was still a vague image, because of the expanse between us, but enough to identify who the person was. Uchiha Sasuke was staring right at me. Unknown. She looked around, trying to find him, but her attempts were clearly useless as she had not even the slightest idea who she was looking for. If she did, it would still be useless anyway, since he liked to consider himself a pro in hiding, while she, in turn, was only a little girl trying to seek. She'd find no one, of course. He was hidden in the last places of anyone's assumptions. Camouflaged amongst the 100 other bodies that walked this hallway. Unnoticed within the depths of the crowd of scurrying students. Concealed beneath the shadows that loomed on every isolated corner. Behind the plain sight of an ordinary being. A predator is waiting. She turned around and spotted a pair of eyes that were staring back at her, watching her every move. The look on her face. The alarm and fright in her eyes. The suspicions and accusations that crossed her mind. The way she scurried off like that. Priceless. I ran, lasting as long as I could until stitches developed in the side of my stomach. My aching lungs threatened to explode at the under pressure of the heavy panting that I couldn't seem to slow down. Eventually, I gave in to the urge to stop, satisfying my apprehension instead by a fast walk. All the while, puzzling questions swarmed in and out my head. Why had Sasuke been staring at me? I wondered, though, how long he had been watching me. And why? There had been nothing friendly, nor positive, about his expression earlier. He was more frowning, looking deep in thought at least, from what I saw with the far distance that was between us, not to mention the dozen other students that passed by and blocked our view. Or maybe he hadn't been looking at me. Maybe he was looking at I thought as I spotted some pretty brunette randomly walking past. Yeah, maybe he had been looking at someone else. How did I ever come up with the idea that Sasuke was staring at me? Well, my thoughts were perhaps driven by extreme paranoia, but still, I shouldn't have skipped to conclusions. It was silly. Sasuke wasn't the stalker type. And, if anything, I was more likely to stalk him, sensible speaking. So that had to be it. He was looking at someone else, someone who just happened to be at the same spot in the hallway where I had been standing, at the exact same time. It was the only rational reason I could come up with. So why couldn't I escape the gut feeling that I was still under surveillance? The moment the dismissal bell rang throughout the academy by the end of the day, I intended on heading straight home. The thought of first passing by my locker didn't occur in my clouded state of mind, and presently assignments were the least of my concerns. In any case, considering that I had not paid heed to even one of today's lessons, I doubt I'd know which classes I had homework for in any case. I'd been too occupied spotting tails, or if a gaze lingered a second too long than a stranger's usual glance. Needless to say, I was obsessed. But I had every reason to be, considering this rogue had described my clothes yesterday in details too exact to be a lucky guess. I'd be a fool to think it was coincidental. As well, he had been watching us the other night. All throughout the evening, while both Sasuke and I thought we were alone and I had felt safe, we were actually being watched upon by a gaze unbeknownst to us that existed then. We were being observed, I was observed. As though a hidden camera was planted somewhere I wasn't aware of, I was viewed and scrutinized secretly by an out-of-sight surveillant. I shuddered as I dragged Ino along the corridors and out of the school building. As always, it was a refreshment to have the cool mid-autumn air blow across my face after having spent 7 hours in crowd-filled, body-odor-scented rooms of the school. Normally, the academy smelled rather alright, if not neutral. However, in the afternoon, when all the puberty-undergoing freshmen and sophomores have had their gym blocks, sweating and stinking like crazy afterwards, the school instantaneously turned into a stink bomb. Despite that, Ino still struggled to go back inside, for the sole reason that the guys were here today. Hey Sakura. I skidded to a stop, whipping around to find a grinning Kiba making his way toward us. Shortly behind him was a certain brunette that caused a half-gasp, half-choke to emit from Ino. I rolled my eyes. She'd go for guys who were ideally hot, but once her eyes set on someone, all the confidence would evaporate like a droplet of water on a 50-degree summer afternoon. Ironically, she'd prefer to admire from afar, which was, needless to say, so unlike her. I stammered, my feet itching to leave the school grounds as quickly as possible. Hey, so what did you do with Sasuke the other night? His grin was so wide that it stretched across his face and beyond. Shikamaru stood off to the side, his eyes wandering in an uninterested manner. I could tell he was listening though. Kiba's jesting inquiry had Ino turning to me in perplexity, completely forgetting about her unspoken crush that stood directly in front of her. Sasuke. The other night. Is he kidding? Oh, not kidding. Kiba bantered like a child in a playground, his eyes twinkling at me with enjoyment. He looked really worried when he ran out the house. He thought everyone was asleep, but I was wide awake. He puffed out his chest, as if by outsmarting Sasuke he'd won a very significant match. I had a feeling that didn't happen very often, judging by how much he raved about his most likely seldom victory. Then, all thoughts in my brain froze in place. Ran out the house. I repeated, the pieces falling into its corresponding positions. He wasn't at some internet cafe thing. Where? Kiba blurted, baffled by the words that were coming out of my mouth. Nah, he was at home, stayed up all night. I'm pretty sure the dude I saw sitting in front of the computer wasn't a clone. He was doing some project. Which I haven't even started on, by the way. Crap. Paying absolutely no attention to the senseless jabber, I questioned, and Konkuro, who had supposedly been taking over the internet that fateful night. He was, snoring. What's he have anything to do with this? Words were drained out of my throat as I let this new piece of information sink in. Kiba continued to tease while Ino demanded for all the details, the dirt, but their dialogue was muted to my ears. The only sound I could hear was the voice in my head, repeating over and over. Sasuke's a liar. I arrived home several minutes afterwards with Ino's delay, insisting on gossip as she preferred to run her mouth rather than her limbs, and, much to my discomfort, found the garage unoccupied. My parents weren't home yet. I was alone in the house again. I cringed at the thought. Ino had bid goodbye before I even realized it, and soon I was left standing by myself before the front door. It creaked as I opened it, and the sound echoed through the halls of the empty and silent abode. I looked around, scanning the void from floor to its high ceilings, from wall to wall, and suddenly the place I lived in no longer seemed safe, as though it had been replaced by a structure that resembled closely to a haunted mansion. Stiff and wary, I walked in. After switching on every single light in the ground floor, a habit I've developed whenever I was on my own, I headed straight for my room, locking the door shut behind me. Automatically, I closed the windows and shut all the blinds and curtains. It was all for precautions. Out of the quiet blue, a chime rang out from my opened computer and on the screen sat a blinking window. The seething voice was harsh and raspy, so much so that I couldn't tell whether it belonged to a man or a woman. Chills were sent down my spine, running back and forth as it spread a sense of terror throughout the rest of my body. I needed not to look at the caller ID, not ask for the caller's name, because, in the back of my mind, I was already well aware of who was calling. I already knew who he was. Put the phone down, the voice whispered sharply, clearly unsatisfied by my apparent unresponsiveness. I was shaking all over, and I felt as though I was going to collapse soon due to fear. I gripped the phone tighter to my ear, afraid I might drop it, as the hand that held it was numb, quivering violently. He was talking to me. Just on the other line. He was right there. Tell me, what does a normal person do when a killer is on the phone? Gathering up all the courage I had at the moment, which was not a lot, taking into account all the valor that had been drained the moment I heard the disturbing voice, I opened my mouth to speak. Put the stupid phone down. At first I only gaped, trying to utter words of refusal. Eventually though, I whispered, in a voice barely audible and drenched with replicated firmness, no. Don't be a bad girl. Put the phone down. You killed her. You murdered someone, I rambled, though it was mostly to me as I attempted to convince myself rather than towards him. You told me to. It's supposed to be a game. I pointed out desperately, you told me it was a game. It is. The voice affirmed, a very existent game. I never wanted you to kill Kin. I whispered desperately, my legs threatening to cave underneath me. I never wanted her dead. Yes, you did. Deep inside, you did. A pregnant pause situated in the conversation as I contemplated. After a while, I said, I'm calling the police. Which was the stupidest thing I could have said. Way to give away the plan. I heard a snicker on the other line. You wouldn't. A hissing voice came. I will. I persisted, I will right now. Another snicker, you still don't get it yet, do you? Suddenly, his tone changed. It was no longer raspy. No longer whispering. It sounded firmer, more threatening. Much more controlling. A man's voice. Listen here, Pinky. In every game, there is a player one who controls how the game is going to go. We're playing my game right now. Meaning, you follow me and my rules. I guess I forgot to mention that to you in the beginning, when I asked you to play with me. My bad. Don't panic though. There's only one rule. Rule number 1, shut the hell up. You tell no one about our little game. No one. You tell the cops, they die. Tell your friends, they die. Tell your parents. They die. Anyone you spill the beans to will die. And don't you say I wouldn't dare, because I would. I already killed one person. I wouldn't mind killing a dozen more. I blinked back the tears that were forming in my eyes. This was real. I could tell by the tone and solidness in his voice. He wasn't joking around. This isn't happening, I thought to myself. This only happened in movies. In books. Not in real life. Not to a hard-working girl who achieved straight A's, never missed a curfew, never smoked or drank, never done anything to deserve this. So why was this happening? Weak in the knees, I leaned against the wall for support, slowly sliding down to the ground. My head shook again and again, repeating the words, "This isn't happening, this isn't happening," continually in my mind as if the action would somehow undo the situation I'd gotten myself into. It didn't. A few seconds later, I was still under the same circumstances. "Why are you doing this?" I whispered in between heavy pants. "There's something, you know, that you really shouldn't." The sly tone was back. He was forbidden now, not so much hostile. "What do you mean? That little incident." "What little incident?" "You know." I did. The old man who was attacked in the alley. But somehow I refused to believe that that was connected with this. Nevertheless, I replied, "What happened in that alley?" "Nothing. Absolutely nothing. You will be quiet about it. That man's nothing now. It's over." He was talking in riddles. "Why don't you want anyone to know?" I asked. "You said he was no one. This is not about what happened. This is about what you saw. What you saw that no one should have seen in the first place." "What did I see? What are you talking about? Do you understand me? You tell nothing to anyone. And don't do anything stupid. I'll know if you break the rule. I'll see every single thing you do. I'll be watching, Pinky. All the time." Click. The conversation ended before I could say anything else. To my left, a sound erupted softly from the computer that signalized someone had logged off. I turned to see it was the rogue. This, though, did not bring any kind of relief. I knew that even supposing he was offline, even though he had already hung up the phone on the other end, he was only temporarily gone. He would come back. He would be watching. He always was. From where, I had no idea, and that was the reason for my biggest disadvantage, because he could see me, and I was not him. There were surveillance cameras everywhere, following me, eyeing me, except they weren't exactly cameras. They were real human eyes. It was clear to me now, what my place was in this little game of his, what he wanted and intended me to be. To be able to play any sort of a board game, logically, you'll need two main things: the player and the representing token, also known as a game piece, the object the player controls to be able to carry through and play the game. The player, in the process, enjoys the game, if it goes well to his liking. But why wouldn't it when the token, a non-living thing, did not have the ability to object? The player was in control. The game piece only follows. In this little game that I was involuntarily playing in, he was the player. And I was his game piece. I had woken up the next morning to the aroma of newly cooked bacon overwhelming my room, the scent most likely seeping through the narrow slit at the bottom of my bedroom door from the kitchen. I did my morning rituals, which consisted of shower, blow dry, brush teeth, fix hair, etc., and had changed quickly, which explained why I had wound up going to school in jeans and a simple gray tee. Unable to withhold my curiosity any longer, I dashed out my room and down the stairs. The first thing I spotted was the luscious-looking dish laid out neatly on the dining table: bacon, hash browns, scrambled eggs, and pancakes topped with syrup I knew well was maple, small strawberries, slices, and cream, complete with a glass of juice lying beside the plate. Just looking at it had my mouth watering. I haven't had that kind of breakfast prepared for me in the morning for weeks. The sight of it was like a model picture ripped out of an exclusive restaurant's exclusive menu. "Good morning, honey. I snapped my head up the first time I really looked at anything else besides the food and was greeted by my mom's loving smile, which I haven't seen in days. "Mom, you're home," I exclaimed, hugging my mother. "We came back at around 4 in the morning. Your dad's still sleeping in the bedroom." How the rest of my morning turned out since then was fairly easy to tell. Great, seeing as my parents were home finally. I ate my breakfast with much enthusiasm until the first negative thought of the day crossed my mind. Was that in fact a good thing? To have my parents home, when I currently had a stalker possibly lurking right about now around the house, waiting to see if I was going to break the rule. It was beneficial for my case. At least I was no longer home alone, at least for now, but definitely not for them. They were better off on business trips, safer at least, and farther from the rogue who I wouldn't be able to get rid of in a long time, it seemed. My bliss had only lasted until I bid goodbye to my mom, dying away a few minutes after I left the warmth of home as I walked unaided along the near isolated sidewalks of the residential area. Suddenly, a weird feeling developed in my guts, nothing positive, and on impulse, I turned to look behind me, half expecting to see someone there. There wasn't. Anxious, I walked faster. I reached the school gates, exhausted from the walk which had along the way developed into a run, then into a sprint. Which was the reason I was sweating unconditionally in a heated art room at the present moment. This added to the fact that I was always drawn from reality and lost within my thoughts. It was easy to say that I was the oddest one in the class right then. It was as if I could think of nothing else except rogue. Had he meant all that he said? Would he actually go as far as murder, only to keep me quiet? And what for? Hadn't he said that old man meant nothing to him? To them. He said it wasn't what had happened that I had to shut up about. It was what I saw. I wondered, though, what exactly had I seen? I did not even know myself. The bell rang without me noticing it, and had only gotten the hint when I realized half the class had gone. Distractedly, I grabbed my sketchbook and went out into the hallways. As I made my way in a daze through the bustling students as they hurried to their next class, I was deep in thought about the alley scene, trying my hardest to replay what I'd seen in my head, trying to figure out what was there that was so important to this group that the rogue was apparently part of. I didn't know how long I had wandered in the halls, or how far exactly, seeing as I was nowhere near my initial destination, which had been my locker. All that I was aware of really was the sudden force that hit me as I turned around a corner and the F-bomb in my ear, jolting me back down to earth, before looking around and realizing that my stuff had scattered all across the floor. Sakura. I looked up to see who had spoken. Sasuke. On his face, he wore an evident "what the hell is wrong with you" look that clearly was aimed at me. "What are you, blind or something?" "Sorry." I mumbled and bent down to pick up my stuff, which happened to be every piece of my drawings spread out onto the floor and currently being trampled on. "How convenient." Sasuke sighed heavily, muttering something about my being reckless that didn't sound so complimentary, and surprised me by kneeling down as well to collect the sheets of paper at a faster speed. We stood up at the same time, and I busied myself by shoving all my work into a binder as Sasuke handed them to me. I felt him staring. By his solid stance and how feet planted unmoving from where it stood, I knew he was not going to leave. He simply remained in the same spot, observing. My common sense must have been damaged by the collision, because without warning I heard myself say, "You lied to me." He blinked. "You were home," I alleged, irritated by his clueless response. "You weren't at some coffee shop." "You were home." "All right," he responded reluctantly. "Fine, I was home. So how did you get to me so fast? Why does that even matter?" Truthfully, I didn't know. I was doubtful of him when I became aware of the fact that he'd gotten to me rather quickly, and for a moment I suspected that maybe it's because he was already at my house in the first place, already watching, but now that Kiba had confirmed he wasn't, I had no reason to be so mistrustful. But suspicion wasn't what was generating my queries. Before, it was. Now, it was plain and simple curiosity. Just answer me. I ran. It was my turn to blink. What? I ran. 'Cause you were so panicked. What did you want me to do? Go for a stroll? And you couldn't just have told me that in the first place. We have a curfew, he explained in aggravation, at home. I figured if you knew I'd snuck out of the house, you'd go ahead and rat me out again. He said, disgusted. It didn't take a scientist or a highly sought-after professor to figure out that his repugnance had been dedicated to me. I sighed, shaking off the antipathy that had returned between us, and turned my attention back on my bag, an unsystematic chaos of hurriedly crammed possessions. I stuffed my belongings further inside, randomly inserting the slightly crumpled drawings into my binder. Consequently, a loose leaf paper fell out. Sasuke, finally tearing his gaze away, knelt down and picked it up from the ground. His actions then surprised me. He didn't hand it back, as I had expected him to. Instead, he stared at the paper, a frown forming in his pretty face and a crease on his pimple-free forehead. I, too, frowned, but in curiosity. The piece of paper was turned away from me, therefore I could see nothing more than the white blankness of its backside. I couldn't exactly see which of my work he was looking at. What? I asked. Sasuke, in response, shook his head, finally taking his gaze off the sheet of paper. He handed it back to me. This. I then saw what it was. It was the snake-like drawing I'd doodled in class just a few days ago. You drew it? Yeah, I said, a strange feeling forming inside of me, and more so the longer I stared at the picture. Before, at the first time I saw it, I assumed it was only dirt, just oddly shaped. I see now that it was too perfectly formed, like the legless reptile, to only be dirt. It was a tattoo. This is not about what happened. This is about what you saw. What you saw that no one should have seen in the first place. This was it, what he had been talking about. The tattoo. Something that symbolized them, their group, or whatever. It was vital because it was a way to identify them, say, to the cops. So, why is Sasuke? What's it to you? I asked curiously. It just, his voice faded, pondering. It looks familiar. I froze. Familiar? Yeah. Well, I don't know. He said, I think I've seen it before. Oh. Well, that's certainly strange. Tell me something. What does a tattoo of a creepy old man I saw hiding beneath the shadows of an alley where I had witnessed another older man who happens to be a drug dealer bleed to death nearly a month ago have anything at all, to do with Sasuke, a little delinquent boy I met years ago? Yeah, I came up with nothing too. But that does not cross out the fact that Sasuke had apparently seen this symbol, or so he thought, and it looked familiar to him. Why? Or how?